Hello, welcome to Lunchtime Agenda. I'm Tom Connell. Well, there's been plenty of evidence that the Australian government is towing or turning back asylum seeker boats. The government continues to refuse to comment, to confirm or deny. Indonesia has been commenting they want Australia to stop the practice. The Foreign Minister says that's not happening.
We made a promise to the Australian people that we would end the people smuggling trade, and we will take whatever steps we can lawfully take to ensure that we protect our sovereignty and end this trade, and that's what we will do.
Labor says this policy is hurting the relationship between Indonesia and Australia. They also say that the government's refusal to go into details about an incident where asylum seekers claim to be mistreated by the Navy is also hurting the reputation of the Navy. Here's Labor's Michelle Rowland.
Have had incidents happening where the government has failed to be forthright, has failed to provide full disclosure, and if they have provided disclosure, it's only come after severe accusations that they needed to make this disclosure.
Well, for more on this and the rest of the day's political talking points, we're joined by Liberal MP Dan Tehan out of our Melbourne studio, and also Alana McTiernan. She, of course, is a Labor MP joining us out of our Perth studio. Thank you both for joining us today, and I might start with you, Dan, if I can. This Navy side of the story that's coming out today, they're denying this has happened, of course, and they're giving a bit more detail, saying that some of these burns were in fact already inflicted on asylum seekers and the Navy helped treat those wounds. But given how late it's coming out, given the fact the government's been very silent on this before now, this appears to be hurting the Navy's reputation.
I don't think it is. I think the Australian Navy has an impeccable reputation, and all this is doing is showing that the government is fair income about making sure that the commitments we took to the last election to stop the people smuggling trade are working. We have to look at the facts. 80% less arrivals. I don't think we've had an arrival by boat in the last 4 weeks. Clearly, the people smugglers, I think, are getting desperate, and this is what we're seeing. The Australian Navy has an impeccable reputation. There is no evidence to suggest otherwise in this incident, and I think what we need to do is focus on the fact that lives aren't being lost at sea because there's been an 80% reduction in the boats making the perilous trip across the waters here to Australia, and that's what we need to focus on.
Surely, Dan, the best approach to this is, yes, come out and deny it, but provide some sort of information, some sort of detail on why it's inaccurate, and be open to an investigation. The first thing we had from the government yesterday was just a blanket, no, it's not happening. They said there's absolutely there's nothing substantiated about the claims. Well, we did see some photos. We didn't know exactly what they related to, but such a closed book does hurt the reputation of the Navy, doesn't it?
No, I think the Australian Navy's reputation is in place. I think what we're seeing is an approach which is working, and that's what we have to remember. We're seeing less boats coming across the waters. We're seeing less deaths as a result of that, and that's what we need to focus on. The Navy has made it quite clear that their reputation hasn't been harmed, that nothing has been done that was wrong. What they are doing is helping us with Operation Sovereign Border in a way which is working and which is lessening the people smuggling trade. And I think what this is an indication of is that the people smugglers are getting desperate. And if they're getting desperate, then our policy approach is working. And I think all Australians must reflect on that as a good thing.
When you go to those claims, though, and I'm not suggesting I have any information otherwise in this incident, but you look back at something like Children Overboard, initially denied, they didn't want to launch necessarily a full investigation. Well, that turned out to be accurate. So isn't it important to be transparent on these matters?
Well, it is important to be transparent on these matters, but the fact is there is no evidence to suggest any wrongdoing. We have seen no evidence whatsoever. So why would you launch a witch hunt when there is no evidence which has been produced? Our Navy has an impeccable reputation. There is no evidence to suggest that there has been any wrongdoing in this situation. So I think what we need to do is focus again on the facts.
Alana McTiernan, Labor's attacks on this have really focused on the fact that the opposition says this is hurting the relationship with Indonesia, this element of it. But isn't that a bit rich? The only reason this area of policy needs a different outlook, and has done so, is because boats started arriving again under Labor.
Look, we acknowledge that our policy settings needed change, and you will probably recall, Tom, that before the last election we did have quite a dramatic change in policy, and we developed the PNG solution, which the current government has adopted. And we think that that is the right way to deal with it. What our concern has always been, and it has been completely and utterly vindicated, that a turn back the boats policy is not something that can be done unilaterally. We cannot. The Indonesian government made it incredibly clear before the last election that that would be completely and utterly unacceptable to them. So what we are doing here is actually jeopardising one of our most important international relationships in order to pursue this this very foolhardy policy, and in the process it is damaging the reputation.
At the moment it is happening. There hasn't actually been any consequences as yet, apart from some not overly strong words from Jakarta, some getting a bit more pointed now, but it's happening, isn't it? The boats are being turned back.
But look, can I say that there's two aspects to that policy? I mean, underlying this is a policy that was started in the latter days of the Labor government, which was the PNG solution, basically saying that regardless of your claim, you are going to be sent to PNG or Nauru, and that you will be processed there and you won't have any opportunity for resettlement. Now, arguably, that is the element of the process of the policy that is really causing a change of heart. The turn back the boats policy was always full of risk, really very, very clearly going to risk our relationship with Indonesia, and as we are seeing, it is creating difficulties for our Navy, and I think we're putting the Navy into an incredibly difficult position, forcing them to take this sort of unilateral action and escalating a hostility with Indonesia.
OK, I'd like to shift focus now to the International Court of Justice. We know there's a case there between East Timor and Australia, hearing allegations that Australia seized documents in 2004, all relating, of course, to that treaty over an oil and gas field, a very valuable one off the coast of East Timor. Dan Tehan, let's go to perception here more than anything. These ASIO raids that happened on the Legal Council of Dili just before this case, that's not a very good look, is it?
Well, the case is ongoing at the moment, and we need to wait and see what the outcome of the case is before we prejudge anything. We have a first-class relationship with East Timor. The bonds between the two nations are incredibly strong. And
well, they're strained at the moment, but just further to those ASIO raids, I mean, we still haven't heard what the national security risk was for the reason for these raids. We're none the wiser. It looks to all the world, doesn't it, that this is purely us trying to hang on to a financial asset.
Well, let's wait and see what happens with the case. Obviously, East Timor have taken this to the International Court of Justice. The case is ongoing at the moment. There are hearings going on, and let's wait and see what the outcome is before we comment further, because sometimes you have these issues occur between nations. A similar thing has happened between Australia and Japan, but the relationships remain strong, and the overwhelming thing is that the bonds between East Timor and Australia are close and will always remain close.
Alana McTiernan, another area of perception, if you like. The treaty that was agreed to means East Timor, one of the poorest nations in Asia, could in the near future, if these assets, oil and gas ones, are tapped into, miss out on billions of dollars of revenue. A really small country, very poor compared to Australia. Should Australia, regardless of this case, be renegotiating this treaty?
Well, certainly that's my view. I've had a long involvement with East Timor, Timor-Leste, and I certainly think that a wealthy country like us should not be really trying to fleece the East Timorese. This is something where we should be renegotiating this treaty. And again, I think what we're seeing here, both in the with the spying allegation, and then this, what seems to me to be a very heavy-handed approach in light of this proceeding going in, the ASIO raid, taking all that documentation, I think we do risk our relationship with East Timor. I don't think we have got a hugely close bond. I mean, 60,000 East Timorese died in the Second World War, essentially protecting Australian troops because they took the side of the Australian troops in East Timor. So we've got a debt of honour. There is absolutely no doubt we've got a debt of honour, and I believe that we should be ensuring that this treaty is as fair as possible and that we don't try to scam the East Timorese out of their proper share of the oil revenues that are going to flow from that Timor Sea negotiations. I'll just make this point to Dan. I mean, these relationships can be damaged, and the East Timorese are very, very sensitive right through the country, from the highest level to the ordinary person on the street. They are very, very aware of this treaty and very concerned about the way in which traders can...
We're just going to move on. I'll alert our viewers there is a news conference with Anthony Albanese, the Shadow Infrastructure Minister, on APAC, so 648 if you'd like to watch that. But just to touch on whaling with you, Dan Tehan, the Prime Minister electing not to raise this as a topic when he met with his Japanese counterpart Shinzo Abe. This appears to show, would it not, that his priority is on a free trade agreement rather than a cessation of whaling?
No, look, I think, and look, I have... obviously whales that in my electorate, that's one of the best places to come and watch whales. But what the Prime Minister has said is there is common understanding of where everyone's position is on that issue, whereas with the free trade agreement with Japan, we have a real opportunity here to back up on the free trade agreement we were able to finalise with South Korea and have a real win for our exporters. He wants to make sure that we get results, and so he's taken the opportunity to be able to present the case as to why we need that free trade agreement. And I'm sure
you talk about the common understanding. There is one, but a lot of these sort of agreements, when it comes to countries stopping these sort of acts, come after years of pressure. So isn't this a bit of that pressure seeping away, if you like?
Well, look, they also come from pressure domestically from within, and often if there's outside countries which are just hectoring, then it actually can be a little bit counterproductive. What we have to do is demonstrate the closeness of our relationship, and if we have an opportunity, remembering that the first commercial agreement that Australia ever signed was with Japan after the Second World War, if we can take that another step and have a free trade agreement, then the closeness of those relationships will increase. It's better for our economy, it'll be better for the Japanese economy, and we can get a real win out of this. Obviously, the Japanese know clearly what our position is on whaling.
We are nearly out of time. Alana McTiernan, quickly your thoughts. I mean, Labor did have a bit of a stall on free trade agreements when it came to Japan, so they need to perhaps pursue this a little bit more than your government.
Look, I agree fundamentally with Dan. I think there is the whaling industry makes no sense for Japan, right? It is, and I think that in fact it is the case that there has been almost like this international pressure that has actually got support for the industry, which, you know, because it's just completely ludicrous. The vast majority of Japanese people do not eat whale meat. There's vast stockpiles of whale meat. So on this one, I guess I'm a bit on the side of Dan. I'd probably put effort into supporting those groups in Japan that are trying to get a change of consciousness in the domestic market, because I do think the approach we've taken is only hardening their resolve towards this ridiculous industry.
I'm going to have to wrap you up there. Thank you both very much for your time today on Lunchtime Agenda, and stay with us wherever you're watching. After the break, we'll look into Indigenous employment.